The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
You have to let yourself sit in the ache in order to experience the joy of the turn in the story, which in our case, in the gospel story, is the cross and resurrection and the fact that he's coming back. And so I think for us to experience what Advent is inviting us to experience, it's good to stop and feel the ache.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Caroline Cobb is a singer-songwriter known for her deep engagement with Scripture. Her first foray into book writing is Advent for Exiles, 25 devotions to awaken gospel hope in every longing heart. In this episode, Caroline and I discuss the idea of exile, a pervasive theme in the Bible, as well as the artist's role of planting seeds for the new Eden. Caroline Cobb, so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast to talk about your new Advent book.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it.
Your Advent book is called Advent for Exiles. Is there a subtitle?
There is. It's 25 devotions to awaken gospel hope in every longing heart. So it's a little bit of a long subtitle, but it's all in there.
Yeah, it's all in there. Right. Yeah, I don't have to read the book now. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
Tell me about, so this book grew out of a record from 2020. I mean, am I saying that right? Is that fair to say that it grew out of the record, or how do you say it?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I had written a bunch of songs that were fitting into kind of a concept album, Advent to Christmas concept album, and it's called A Seed, a Sunrise. Lots of imagery from Isaiah, lots of kind of exile imagery. And after I put that record out, and it resonated really well, I think because of 2020 and because people were feeling what Advent really is supposed to be, which is this ache and this longing. And because it resonated so well, I had also promised to create a devotional for some Kickstarter backers. It was just sort of one of these extra rewards you get for a certain amount. And I started working on the devotional. I really decided to make it an Advent devotional, and one thing led to another. I didn't really have an intention of publishing it, but I worked so hard on it and felt like, wow, I have a lot to say here, and would love
Were you just going to run it off on
make
the
this a book
machine? Were you just run
I don't know.
I
was going to
school office.
Pay for it myself and figure it all out, and decided, this might be worth pursuing. And one thing led to another, which is, I know, is not the typical story. So I'm really thankful that I get to put this book into the world. Yeah,
that's great. And so this is a book that kind of mashes up Isaiah and Advent and a few other threads.
Right.
I'm using the word mash up to goad you a little bit, because I know that was a word that you weren't comfortable with. So
That's right. I kept on trying to describe what the book was as I was writing it, and the elevator pitch kind of eludes me still, but it's more of a tapestry, I decided, kind of these many threads woven in to make this one picture, rather than kind of a mashup, which feels sort of random,
Yeah.
But my heart in it is to kind of take this storyteller, songwriter, artistic approach that it comes naturally to me, and then mash it up or thread it together with, biblical reflection, truth, this biblical metaphor, and this theme of exile that runs all through Scripture, and then, of course, laid on top of exile of Advent is just this. I think they go really well together. The idea of exile and Advent.
Yeah, well, I want to hear more about that, and maybe this next question gets at that. You say, and I guess this is maybe your introduction. So I can't fully explain why, though I cannot fully explain why, the prophet's use of metaphor and imagery in his message of hope for the exiles rings all sorts of bells in my artist heart. I guess that's maybe, I guess that's a separate issue. That's your creative side,
Right.
and then Advent is another side of things. So it maybe it's not fair for me to ask when you just said I can't fully explain why, but
Right.
I'd love to hear you talk about how Isaiah's way of talking about things and your creative vision for things and Advent all kind of connect and intersect.
Right. Yeah. I think I started reading, well, I've read Isaiah before, but our church was going through Isaiah as a church, and we were talking about it in our community group. And a lot of people don't like Isaiah. It just feels like an impressionist painting almost to people, because he is using so much imagery. The linear thinkers among us, I think, have a harder time. And if we try to shove him into this linear thinking, it is hard to understand Isaiah. But once you start seeing images and metaphor in Isaiah, and it's all connected. And then Isaiah is very often quoted in the New Testament. I think it's one of the most quoted Old Testament books. And there's so many hyperlinks to Revelation. And so anyway, the images that Isaiah uses are beautiful. And these images of longing for a king or longing for a garden to sprout up in the wilderness. And instead of just saying you're a sinner, he will use metaphor, as authors often do, to show what that feels like, to help us feel it at a gut level. And so for me, that's what I'm always trying to do as a songwriter. And sometimes we don't need to make up new metaphors. They're already there for us in Scripture, and they do make us feel what we are intended to feel. So all of these images really make us long for the garden, make us long for God's presence, for this king that is coming, for this savior, for righteousness that we can't get on our own. And so that started me writing songs, which led into this, and it just continued and snowballed from there.
Yeah. I love, from Isaiah reminds us that it's dangerous actually to try to be too at home, right? That the state of exile is kind of where we are, and we're on pilgrimage. I know those exile and pilgrimage aren't the same thing, but there's certainly some connections between those ideas, and that we get ourselves in trouble when we insist on making, that we're not going to stop until this world is our home.
Right.
And so I'm really grateful for that reminder every Advent, that we're waiting, and that we are not where we belong yet.
Yeah, and I think these images that he's using, he was writing to the exiles or to those who were about to be in exile, and I'm sure they were reading it after exile. And so these images weren't just beautiful pictures for them. They were actually what they were feeling. And then they're filled with hope too. So it's not just, I know that you feel that you're in the wilderness. It's also, I'm going to plant a seed and turn this into a garden. And they're clinging to that hope. And I think in the same way, we're longing in Advent for Jesus to come and do all of these things that he's promised to do. And he's already broken in, and then he's going to come back. And so we're living in that tension of exile where we're not fully home, but we do have a home,
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's already broken in, and we're already at work to push back the darkness. And so there's a lot of parallels, I think, between Advent and exile and Isaiah and all of these things that go into this book. So it's exciting.
Yeah. How do those ideas that you just articulated, how do they make a difference in the way you make art, whether that's music or prose writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think that I love the idea that we need to engage people imaginatively. I've heard a lot of different people in the rabbit room and kind of adjacent circles talk about that, but how, we're not just computers that are downloading information, and we don't approach scripture that way. We don't approach seasons of the year that way. And we need to engage people imaginatively through stories and pictures and poetry and song so that we're engaging the whole person. And the idea with this book is to help people really feel the ache of exile, the ache of Advent, not just to feel it for its own sake or to make everyone feel down, but to increase our joy at Christmas or increase our joy at the gospel, at this thing that we're waiting for, that one day Jesus will come and make his home with us forever. And to also make Christmas taste all the sweeter because, the fast before the feast. And so I think that that's really important. And that's really a big part of what this book is about, is just setting the table for joy by helping us acknowledge the longing that we feel.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess there's one way of approaching that is slightly artificial, like imagine being longing for a home or whatever,
right?
Or for that matter, I guess you could have a dinner party and serve dinner late so people are a little hungrier, but
right.
And they enjoy your cooking more. But I feel like you're talking about something different from that. I mean, I think it's actually acknowledging what's really true, and we try to ignore that sort of ache. That is just that's just the human condition,
Yeah. I think last time I was on, we were talking about paradox, and I think it leans into that conversation too, that there is, I'm not going to just make you wait on my dinner and it's going to taste better. Although, maybe I could use some of that. I'm not the best cook. I'm not sure. But the idea that we are acknowledging the ache. So we kind of are as artists or, writing this book. I hope I wrote it in an artistic way, kind of lifting the veil on what is. And that includes the things that are broken. But we don't just do it and stop there. We're lifting the veil on what is. So I have a song called like Death, You Terrible Thing, for example. And it's a song about me witnessing death up close and my dad dying. And that was the first time that it really shocked me how death is terrible. But then to allow myself to see behind the veil and to say death is terrible also allowed me and kind of ushered me right into my next statement, which is the gospel and the resurrection is better than I thought. And I think you kind of hold that intention, the already and the not yet. And maybe sometimes we need to start with the not yet so that we realize how good the good news of already is, And I think that this book is trying to do that over and over again. And I do that a lot in my music too, because a lot of my story is that seeing my sin and then, the gospel's better than I thought, seeing death and, the resurrection is better than I thought, just over and over again in different iterations.
Yeah, that's so good. I love it. Yeah, in one of your devotions, you say, just wait a moment here. Resist the temptation to fast forward to the happy ending. Let yourself feel the homesickness, the weight of sin on your shoulders, the hunger pangs, which is really a summation of what you just said.
I think a lot of times we know the Bible story so well that sometimes we skip ahead to kind of the happy ending, but it's a whole idea that, Tolkien talks about, that eucatastrophe, where you have to let yourself sit in the ache in order to experience the joy of the turn in the story, which in our case, in the gospel story, is the cross and the resurrection and the fact that he's coming back. And so I think for us to experience what Advent is inviting us to experience, it's good to stop and feel the ache. I think in that devotional in particular, I'm talking about just even the exile, the first exile from the Garden of Eden. It's good to stop and feel that ache so we realize how good it is that Jesus came out of, that his presence came out to find us in our exile. And we don't want to rush too far ahead, because if we do, we diminish our joy.
Yeah. I don't know if this was the same. I don't know if it's the same devotion or not. I think it was a different one. You talk about the idea that waiting on the Lord is active because we live in the already. Even as we live in the already of God's new creation, even as we wait for it to be fully realized. And then you may be quoting somebody here, the idea of hopeful enactments. Is that you, or is that?
That was, I think, a quote from Fleming Rutledge.
Okay.
From her
Sounds
Advent.
like something she would say. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea that, I think in that particular reflection, just talking about how sometimes we think about waiting as sort of boredom, where we're just passively sitting in a doctor's office and scrolling our phones, but how in this Advent type of waiting, we're definitely looking forward, straining our eyes, but we're also actively, like Fleming Rutledge said, we're actively sowing these seeds. We're actively reenacting the kingdom, because we're not part of this kingdom here on earth. So we're sort of living as citizens and ambassadors of God's kingdom here in this other kingdom, here in our exile, on our pilgrimage. And that's very different than sitting and passively waiting for Jesus to come back and not really caring about what's going on around us.
Yeah. And so that's, maybe this gets back to the question I'd asked earlier, how this shapes the way you think about your own creative work.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Just as a kind of seed sowing. We keep interrupting each other. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you. I think for me, like I live in Dallas. I'm not in Nashville, where it's very normal to be an artist. I mean, there's definitely a great artist community here, but I'm sort of in the soccer mom world. I don't know very many other artists in my daily life. But so sometimes I have to remind myself that art is important. It's important to write these songs. It's important to write this book, because in some ways it doesn't feel very important on the surface, or unless it's super useful and I can see exactly what difference it makes. But I think when we think about how art is just one more way that we're sowing seeds to the new Eden. And I know that's very vague and abstract and artistic to even say that, but it's a way of saying there's another story. Everyone around me is swimming in a story that the world is telling us, but I get to say over and over again through songs and through this book, there's another story and it's better. And come with me and live and inhabit this story with me. And the ending is so good. And it's really just the beginning. And so
I was about to say the ending's not even the ending.
I know, exactly. So I think there's something to that. And for some reason, this conversation, it's not in the book or anything, but it reminded me of in Lord of the Rings, whenever Sam goes back to the Shire and things are not as they should be. But the victory's already won. Like the ring has been destroyed. This is showing my nerdiness here, but I think this audience would appreciate. But he has a lot of work to do. And so he has all the confidence in the world that the good guys have won, and evil has been defeated, but he still has to put things right. And he's still aching for something because it's not right. And so I love that too, that there's still a picture for us of what's right in front of us to do. And for me right now, one of the things that God has given me to do is write songs. And every time I try to quit, he's like, no, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just do it differently. So I'm trusting him in that and continue to do some kind of creative work, whether it's music or book writing, to keep telling the better story.
Yeah. I remember Doug McKelvey in a previous episode of this podcast said that his main task in writing Every Moment Holy was just not to say no. And just to when he felt like saying no, just not saying no.
Like to keep going and sowing. Right.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what the harvest is really in artistic work sometimes. I think in other types of work, you might get to see a little bit more of the results. But I think that in artistic work, I mean, how many songs have I listened to or books have I read that I can't quantify what it did to me, nor did I tell the writer what it did to me. So it's sneaky. It does things over time. And so I think that it's important just to always be reminding ourselves that this work does matter. And in a different season, he might have a different kind of work for me, but in this season, to know that it does matter, that's all I need to know.
Yeah, that's so good. And you quote N.T. Wright from Surprised by Hope. I always forget who got surprised by
Right.
what.
Joy, hope. Yes. People get surprised by lots of things.
Yeah, right. He says, what you do in the Lord is not in vain. You're not oiling the wheels of a machine that's about to roll over a cliff. You're not restoring a painting that's shortly going to be thrown in the fire. You're not planting a rose garden that's about to be dug up. And then he actually goes on for several other examples of those kinds of things. And I find that so reassuring. The idea that the good work we do makes its way into the new heavens and the new earth.
Yes, I think that's something I think I've only really understood, and I still don't understand it, but really started to grasp in the last few years, like, oh, this is why it matters. And that's the goodness of God. Like, he didn't have to do it that way, but he did. And it just infuses everything we're doing with a lot more purpose and a lot more mission. And it's not just to make money. It's not just to gain things like listeners or numbers. There's a deep qualitative work that's happening that we'll never really understand the significance of until we get to the other side, I think.
Yeah. Well, your metaphor, I say your metaphor, the metaphor you were using and borrowing of sowing seeds of the new Eden extends into the idea of cultivating your little patch of land, your little patch of ground that's your little corner. And one application of that you offer up, if you call it an application, is don't spend too much time overthinking your specific calling, you say.
Right.
Just look at the patch of ground right in front of you and sow there.
Right.
I love that idea. I'm hoping you have more to say about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get caught up, especially, I have for sure. What is my calling? And try to sort of get this detailed agenda and plan of what the calling is and how we're going to attack it. And I think I've found in my own story that it's one little step in front of the other. And it's actually more prohibitive if we overthink all the time. I am super guilty of this. I get very angsty if I'm doing it right, if I'm doing enough. Should I do it this way or that way? And over again, I feel like what has worked best is just what's next for me to do right now. And yes, it's great to like set goals. In fact, a lot of this started because I set this goal. I may have told you this before, of writing a book or a song for every book of the Bible in a year. And so I like doing that kind of goal. But to me, that's kind of like just sowing seeds and saying, I'm going to plant a bunch of seeds, but I don't know what's going to spring up. Yeah. And I'm going to keep on going, but I don't know what's going to stick and what's going to be important to actually bring to the next level, which is to harvest it. So I think that that's important for me.
That's a really good extension of the seed metaphor, is just in real life, knowing that a lot of seeds don't germinate.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you've got to sprinkle them out there because you don't know which ones are going to germinate, which ones aren't.
Right. And I love the feeling of, there is a feeling, and I don't have it right now. I think I'm about to enter into this new stage of having a blank slate and just sowing a bunch of seeds again. I have a bunch of ideas. But there is a point where I get in my creative life where I feel like I have to bring this to the next stage. These songs, this idea is burning a hole in my pocket. It's ready. It's ready to be harvested, if you will, if you want to keep the metaphor going. Yeah. And so just trusting that process too of I'm going to do these things and we often know what's ready for harvest when it's time.
Yes. I'm looking at my bookshelf here for the book Art and Fear, but I can't read the name of the people who wrote it. Two authors wrote Art and Fear, and there's an example in there of a a teacher of pottery who taught two different classes. You know this example? You know what I'm about to say?
No,
Okay.
I've never read that before.
And one class, in one class, the assignment was you're going to do one pot. It's got to be the best pot you've ever done in your whole life. I mean, you get to spend the whole semester working on one pot, and just do the best pot you can do. And the other class was like, you're getting graded on how many pots you can make. And the people who are just cranking out pots made some bad pots, but they also, their best pots were better than the pots of the ones who were just doing one pot at a time.
That's that's
which
great.
feels like sowing seeds, right?
Yes, that's awesome. The more, in some ways, it's the more the better, without the pressure of making it the best you ever have made.
Yeah.
And I think the longer you go in music, or for me, music, but then in writing and all these things, I feel the more pressure you feel, and you have to resist that first kind where you're like, oh, the next song I write has to be really good. It has to be as good as this other song that happened to be good. But I work best when I just have that mentality of that second example of just cranking and seeing what sticks.
Yeah. I guess this is the greatest hits from past Habit podcast episodes, but the Hellers, JJ Heller and
Dave.
JJ's husband, Dave. Yes, thank you. That was just my brain went blank for a second there. They talked about when they committed to putting out a song, I guess it was every month on Spotify, or was it every week? On a very regular basis, they're putting out a new song, which made them put out songs that they didn't think were necessarily the best thing they'd ever done in their whole life. But the truth is, you don't know which ones are going to reach people, which ones aren't. And so they were surprised by some of the ones that came out, that sort of floated to the top in terms of what people responded to and wanted to hear. So again, I guess we're still on the topic.
Yeah, that's even riskier. That's great. I haven't done that yet, but I think that they're onto something. If you keep going with the metaphor, you could,
Well, if you can write 66 songs in a year about, the 66 books of the Bible, you can do that. Caroline.
I didn't put them all out. That's the difference.
Well, let's do it.
You got to go digging to find those. So there's some of them.
So you think of those 66 songs, some are good and some aren't.
Mm-hmm.
But you may not be as good as you think at knowing which ones are good and which ones aren't, or which ones will speak to somebody and which ones won't.
That's right. That's good. That's food for thought for sure. I agree.
Good. I'm glad to help. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
New plan. I got it.
All right. Well, that particular that one reflection that you wrote about sowing seeds, I thought was just so helpful and so good. And you said the invitation here is not the pressure-filled pep rally call for you to do big things for God in short bursts of fevered camp-high spirituality. Rather, this is an invitation to a farmer's long obedience in the same direction. Mm-hmm. It's a slow, patient, and often unseen work. You don't have to do it all at once. That's right. So wise for people who do creative work. Also, I suspect people who do any other kind of work as well.
Right.
Even if they don't think of it as creative.
What's kind of cool about that this devotional is like, it's definitely not separate pieces. They are woven in to be a whole. And the seed imagery is actually picked up from, day 1, day 2, all these other days, where at first in Isaiah, he's promising this, garden to blossom. And we see that Jesus is actually the seed and this new vine and this new abundant life that's going to come into these barren places. And so I think there's a continuation that's important, where even what we're planting is a gift from him, and he's ultimately the sower, and we get to be these, if you want to say like creator and sub-creator, we're sort of these sub-sowers of what he's given us. So it's nice too, because that takes a lot of the pressure off too, is that it's not on us to even, we're bringing in his beauty and then getting to, create beauty of our own, but it didn't even start with us. So I think that takes the pressure off too. And somehow he's going to take that into the new heavens and the new earth, like we already talked about. And he's going to make it even more beautiful. than we could while we're here.
Yeah. So good. I think you've probably read Supper of the Lamb.
I haven't.
Oh my goodness, you need to go read it.
I know.
Actually, we'll stop a little early so you can go start reading Supper of the Lamb. But Capon talks about the idea that the raw materials of the new heavens and the earth are the materials of the old heavens. I mean, the old earth and I guess the old heavens. And
I feel like I've inhaled a lot of secondhand smoke where I'm like, I need to go back and read all of these original pieces. But yes, I need to read that book for sure.
And he's talking about food, and he says, we carry those flavors into the new heavens because our bodies are going. Our bodies are going there, and are I guess staying here when this earth is renewed. Whatever. I may be getting my end times theology wrong here, but because those flavors and smells are in us, they're going to go to the new heavens and the new earth with us. I just love that insight, and I just love the idea that the things we love here are not going away.
Right.
They're going with us.
I love that too. I love that, and it just it makes the waiting all the more meaningful, I think.
Yeah. I ran across something recently. Actually, it was, the guy who just did the movie about Flannery O'Connor, Ethan Hawke, was talking to in some interview, and he was talking about Aquinas, and he said, Aquinas says one of the ways you know who you are, one of the ways God shows you who you are is what you love. Your loves are an important part of, or they kind of, I say an important part, in some ways they are. It close to the heart of who we are. And those loves, again, as we sow that seed of what we love, those loves are going into the new heavens and the new earth. So,
love that. Which
seems like we've gotten off of Advent, but in my mind this connects, but now I can't remember how.
It connects because, this Advent here, I'll give you something, but
Great.
I think in this Advent waiting period that we're in, we're really enacting what we're doing as a church, as a people of God all year long. So it's like this special season where we are sitting in this waiting and longing, but really, and I think this is an insight I got from Fleming Rutledge as well, this is what our disposition should be all year long. And so that waiting, it's tempting to be like, well, if Jesus is coming back, then nothing I do matters. And like we've been saying this whole time, actually, it matters a ton. It matters all the more because this is going to be in the new heavens and the new earth. And there's a lot of work to be done before he returns. And so it even gives us some urgency because there's a lot of people, that don't know the good news of God's story. And there's a lot of people that are kind of shrouded in darkness and need someone to come in there with a sword fighting with the light, And so I think music and story and all of that is important all year long, but especially as we're in Advent, this is where we are rehearsing that waiting period and saying to ourselves, not only am I looking over the horizon like a watchman waiting for Jesus to come back, but also I'm sent on mission because, the presence of God that these exiles were longing for now dwells in me because I have the Holy Spirit and I'm part of a church that's filled with the Holy Spirit. And so we're supposed to go out and be the presence of God to other people, just like Jesus was the presence of God to us when he came at Christmas.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you brought it all back. Thank you. I thought we were heading off into who knows where, but count on Caroline Cobb to bring it back.
Something like that.
All right. Well, I want to hear, I know you've told me before, but I want to hear how you answer this question today. And that is, who are the writers that make you want to write?
Oh, that's a good question.
You started.
I think that with writing, I noticed that I quoted a lot from folks like C.S. Lewis or Andrew Peterson or Tim Keller, Nancy Guthrie, Tolkien. I feel like it was neat to see that a lot of fiction had also shaped the way I see about Advent. And learning too how some of those stories play into some of the things that people who are telling the story of the Bible teachers, how they interweave together. So I I know that I'm missing something because I do feel like I'm constantly getting poured into by writers and Bible teachers and storytellers, and I somehow that gets, germinates inside and comes out into this written word.
Yeah.
Writing a book is also scary because you're supposed to cite everyone, and I'm like, was this an original thought? I
Yeah,
think it
right.
is, but I'm sure it's not. Nothing's truly original,
Sure.
and it's just putting it all together was
Yeah.
a really good challenge for me.
Yeah. I guess I should have asked how was that experience of writing a whole book as compared to writing some songs?
Um, I found the best metaphor for me with this was a friend told me it's like you've been running track and you've been running the hurdles, and now someone is asking you to run the 1600, which is the mile, or maybe even a
Yeah.
marathon.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the skills translate. And when I think back to when I was a little girl or when I was in high school, I loved writing, and
Mm-hmm.
people affirmed that in me, writing essays and,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I thought that was coming to fruition through songwriting, but God had something else for me too. So I found it to be harder, but I think also that it's kind of a new sport for me in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of the same tools and some of the same muscles, but also a different outworking of it. A little bit more
Mm.
lonely, a little
Yeah.
longer. But I'm now that the book is out, I'm like, I want to do that again,
Oh,
So
good.
it's just
Yeah.
a different way to express. I feel like songwriting is a lot more like painting, you're like a little color here and a little color here. And then
Mm-hmm.
writing the book felt a lot more linear. Like I have to be a little bit more direct
Yeah.
sometimes, but you can
Mm-hmm.
still add a lot of color and a lot of creativity to how you write.
Sure. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there, Caroline. Thank you for being here, and excited about your new book.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.